welcome to the Jedi Hunter Studio. In the canvas in front of you, you see a Stormtrooper. This is the unit we're going to be showing how to paint today. It has white armor, so we're going to tell you how to highlight white and some blending techniques as well. So just give a good look and we'll be right with you. Okay, so we're going to start with the Stormtrooper here. Now, this is the base coating, and I actually technically already base coated with my prime gray sear for the armor. So because I knew I was doing gray sear for the armor, I went ahead and just primed it all in gray sear, and then using the black here to fill in the black areas. So like your, arms, or your elbows, your armpits, hands, guns, face, all those typical blacked out areas for the Stormtrooper. As you can tell, I do thin everything out. It's just easier to thin things out, so just make sure you're continuing with that. You can use water, you can use medium. I use medium because it makes it a little bit more thorough. Make sure I keep everything even, that kind of stuff, but it is a little bit more expensive, so if you don't want to use medium, you can use water. Just be careful with it. This is a pretty easy step. Honestly, the Stormtroopers themselves, so the Stormtrooper, I wanted to start with them because they're kind of FFG's, original miniatures here. It came in the core box. Very basic. Obviously, there's a lot of videos out there to show you how to do it with contrast paints and stuff. This can easily be done with contrast paints, and it can look really well look really good with contrast paints. And so by all means, you can do that. The reason why I don't is because I use miniatures like this as a testing miniatures for my techniques, and I think you guys should as well. So when we're talking about more detailed miniatures, even with Legion, with the newer stuff coming out, these techniques will continue on no matter what miniature you're doing. Versus contrast paints, when you start getting a lot more detailed, or even getting out of Legion, which has 10 times more detail through GW or Malifaux or whatever you're playing. These kind of techniques will continue even through those miniatures. So I always believe in practice makes perfect, and so even with something as simple as the Stormtroopers, I still try to use those same techniques through the Stormtroopers as I will throughout any kind of miniature. So that is why I don't teach on contrast paints specifically. So. And this is, like I said, this is pretty simple here. We're just moving the black, so I'm not going to show you the whole video here of me just painting black, because that's pretty boring. But just make sure you can hit all the black spots. I even paint the guns black because we're doing a certain technique on the guns themselves. The face here is a little bit more difficult. If you guys are brand new into painting, make sure you can go over the lines. It's not a big deal. That's why I actually prime in the same color as I would base coat, because now I can go get my gray sear paint and go back over the lines and make sure they're all straight and where I want them. So this should be a quick step for you guys, but like I said, if it's thin, that's got another reason why it's nice to have thin paints, because if you go over the lines, it's not going to cover up a whole lot. Also, you're not be covering up details, which is very important. So this is, so don't worry about too much on lines here. So I think this is probably the hardest area right here. And sometimes, because people don't, if you turn at an angle like I'm doing and use the long side of the brush, it makes those raised up areas 10 times easier. So just a little quick tip for you right there. So that'll save you a lot of lines doing like that. So as you can tell, it's a pretty straight line. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip on. I'm gonna paint all these black areas here. Important thing to note right here, when I'm painting the side of this, because right after I do this, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna move on to the rest of the miniature, but I'm gonna come back to this shoulder pad and I'm gonna line the top of it, because if you look at the movies and everything, that's kind of how they're done in the movies. And so I'm gonna do a little bit of freehand and line the top of it and show you that. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip ahead here, and then I'm gonna come back to the shoulder pad to show that. Okay, so I've done the rest of the miniature here with black. So I'm coming back to the shoulder line, and what I'm doing is I'm lining the shoulder pad. I'm doing a very small strokes here. Smaller the strokes, the straighter the line. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. The reason why I want to be careful at this instance, because orange is very hard to cover over black, and so because of that, especially when it's thin, and I want to make sure it's thin because I'm going to want to do some blending, and so I'm trying to be a little bit more careful on the lines here. So make sure they're straight lines, and you don't need a whole big line, you just need it just visible basically. So look really good. This is considered freehand, but it's a very simple freehand. You know, it's not like we're painting an actual decal or something, so it should be pretty simple for you. I'm just trying to get these edges here. It's a little bit boring, I apologize. But I think it's important to note what I'm doing here, just to kind of get, if you guys want to try to copy the same effect, it'll be perfect for you. So okay, so that's a pretty simple part. The other part I wanted to show you here is this angle I'm about to do. So I take it from the ear by its helmet all the way down to that corner. That's the angle I set. You know, it's not exactly in the corner here, but it's pretty close. And then I'm just going to black it out. Under the helmet's kind of difficult because the helmet doesn't come off, which is nice in the other miniatures that we were going to be painting for Legion. But still can be done. Just gotta be a little bit more careful. As you can tell, the rest of the miniature is already blacked out. So this is the last part of black I gotta do before I do the shading. That looks pretty good. That's a pretty good, nice little straight line there. The back of it, I'm just gonna take for the edge of his helmet, just straight down. I'm not gonna do an angle. Oop, I went a little bit too far. I can come back though and fix that with the orange. So okay, so from this step on, we're gonna go into the shading. So we'll be right back and get into that. So okay, so we've done all the base coating. We've done the black, we've done the white with the gray sear. What you haven't seen on the video that I didn't do is I went back with the gray sear and cleaned up all the lines. So before I do the shading step here, I went back and cleaned up all the lines, make sure everything was good to go after I do this step, or before I do this step. And that's important because once I do this step, you can't go back as easy. The shading is supposed to be done in kind of one solid fluid motion, and so when you go back and try to shade, it doesn't look even, doesn't look good. So that's a very important thing to remember before you get to this step. Just make sure all your lines are straight and you're good to go. As you notice, I did none oil with 1 drop, and I did 4 parts medium. This is going to be a gray wash that is very subtle, but also when you put more medium in it, the none oil flows to the creases very quickly, and that's exactly the kind of image I'm trying to get on this. I don't really want a dirty look. I just want to subtly, close in those lines. So just subtly get some contrast here. So that's what my goal is. Obviously, if you wanted a more dirty look, you would put less medium in it, make it a little bit thicker, and cover up that white a little bit more. So, and then if you even want it less gray looking, even more subtle, you just put more medium in it. So that's kind of the point. But I tend to find 4 parts medium, 1 part none oil. It works. It gets what I want out of it. So that's my goal here. I really focus on this torso area. There's a lot of detail under the torso. It doesn't really need to be painted, but once you shade it here, it looks really good and kind of pops really nicely. So I like to do the arm creases too. Kind of gives you a nice little look to keep that, and if there is any grime on the miniature, like he was in the mud a little bit, it'll fall to the creases a little bit more. So, but I tend to like a very sharp, crisp looking Stormtrooper. The one thing I have worked with this, if you're trying to look more of a sand trooper, an Argok shade, like a brown shade, looks really good as well. So this is something I'm focusing on one part of the body at a time. So I was focusing on his torso area, and then I'll move on to like a leg or an arm or something like that as well. So You can do this with a bigger brush, and I tend to do it more with a bigger brush, but I'm trying to be a little bit more deliberate with my where I put my wash, so that's why I'm doing with it's a size 2 brush. Uh, that's why I'm doing that. But you can do this with a bigger brush and kind of slop it on and let it just fall to its natural areas. Just focusing on one arm at a time. The other thing with using a smaller brush when it comes to this is that you don't get too much of an excess and it pools up, and if you don't catch the pool, it'll look really bad when it dries. If you notice, I did not use the top of the chest. I did not shade that. I want that very bright. It seems to be where people focus, is the chest, so I wanted to make sure that kept very bright. And there's no real recesses in there, so I didn't even touch it. I'm going back now and just making sure all the areas are even. You kind of want to work a little bit quicker with a shade, because if it dries and it looks bad, again, it's very hard to go back over a shade so and make it look even. And so you just want to be careful and kind of move quickly, but yet very deliberately with shades. So you can really, this kind of step is really important. You can make it look really good or just really poorly. So just be careful with this step. Okay, so this is my mid-level highlight. The focus I want to have people make sure, and this, like I said, we're doing these kind of techniques is because these kind of techniques will go on throughout your career as a painter. So no matter what miniature you're doing, these kind of techniques will always work. So what my focus here is for your mid-level highlight is going to be more of the sunned areas, so the areas that are going to catch a lot of light. I want to make sure that I bring out and make them look a little bit more white. This is actually another gray, so this isn't another white, or this isn't a pure white, this is a gray. Right now I'm hitting the chest. Sorry, it's a little out of focus here, a little out of camera, but I'm hitting the chest here, making sure that's looking really good. The leg is kind of sticking out here, so I want to make sure I hit that leg. Hit that leg really well. I tend to have a top-down view, so I like to look at the miniature as the sun is at high noon, and so when I turn the miniature, no matter what direction it's looking, I still have pretty much the same light structure, if that makes sense. And I'll have another video in the future talking about lighting, because I think it's the most important thing, especially when talking about highlights, on where to put the highlights and everything like that. So anytime you have a leg like this that's kind of sticking out, you always want to make sure to hit those places that are going to hit by light. So that's where the kneecap is here. It's where the legs are going to be at. Now I actually left that rivet that comes up on his leg. I left that alone because I know that's going to be my top level highlight. So I didn't hit it because it doesn't make sense to hit it twice. But I'm already coming back to the chest here, because when I put medium in this, it's going to be very thin. And so when I make it thin, which is what you want, I want to make sure that I come back to it, because it's not going to cover it in one go. Basically, my rule of thumb is if my painting is covering it, if it's getting exactly the color I want in one swipe, it's too thick. I want to make sure I'm doing more layers. And it'll make more sense when we're doing more detailed miniatures. When you're talking about a miniature like this, you can get away with not doing that. But again, I go back to, this is the practice for our future miniatures when we're talking about more details. So just keep with these techniques and know that they work. And then, you know, like we said, when you get to detailed technique miniatures, it's gonna just help you out in the futures here. So these are all the areas here where the sun will be hitting the miniature. I still want to keep with the wash. So when the wash is a very light gray like I did, I still want to show that. So even in the areas that the miniature is being hit by the sun, it doesn't mean that those shaded areas will go away, because it's usually right there in the crease, and so I don't want to cover that up. So I'm careful to not cover those areas up with my mid-level highlight. So I'm going kind of in between. If you think about that left arm right here, there's a kind of a spot that raises up on the right side and the left. So I'm making sure that I'm hitting the middle of those areas, not the full thing. I'm going to hit his back here a little bit, those places that are raised. His back calf, like his back calf is sticking out. So I'm going to hit those areas as well here. Definitely the top of his helmet here. It's kind of weird. The helmets are weird, so you kind of want to go around in a circular pattern, and then in the middle do a straight line like normal. When I make a line with the top of a highlight, I'm going in one direction. It may look like I'm going in two directions, but what I'm doing is I'm laying it down in one direction, picking my brush up and coming back and doing it all one direction. So I'm swooping all the paint in one direction. If that makes sense. And that direction should be towards the top of your highlight. It kind of gives almost a natural kind of way that the light would hit the miniature. Around his face here, making sure that those highlights come up towards his nose or the top of his mouth. On the sides, make sure it comes towards his mouth, not away from it. And that's kind of how I depict on where these highlights are going. Okay, so I think this is a perfect place to stop. I'm just going to continue on doing this. Another very easy step, but go ahead and continue on doing this, and we'll come back with the highlights, I believe, to the gun. Okay, so I highlighted all the white, and now I'm going to be highlighting the black areas. So your gloves, your gun, anything that's kind of raised up, that's going to be black. So, all right. Getting his hand here. Put it back in the camera's view here. So I'm getting the top of his hand, where his left finger is his forefinger, and then I got his thumb as well. So those are the areas I got there. His gun pouch here, I'm trying to get the top of it. Anytime you're questioning on where to put a highlight, you can always use light sources, like putting a light down or at an angle wherever you want the light to hit the model. You know, take a picture of it, do whatever. I usually have a pretty bright light above me, and so what I'll do is I'll have that light up at the highest exposure as possible and kind of see where it reflects off the miniature. Just trying to get the front of this pouch as well, kind of make a little contrast with just looking at the miniature. And so this is actually going to be accidental, but I was noticing while I'm painting this that this is actually my top level color. So a little bit of a mistake here, but what's going to be interesting, that's actually a good teaching lesson as well, is so I'm actually painting right now with my planned out top level highlight, and I'll go ahead and finish this up in the areas that where I would put a mid-level highlight. And the big difference between a top level and to me and a mid-level is the amount of area you're going to be covering. Mid-level highlight is the larger portions of area where the light are going to be hitting. So like where this belt kind of hits, as you notice, almost this entire left side is covered in this mid-level highlight. So that's what I consider a mid-level highlight. And your top level is the areas where it's directly hitting light, so the bigger areas. So if you think of like a car, because armor is similar to a car in a way that it reflects light because it's rounded and very sharp and shiny. So if you look at a car and you kind of see a sunlight kind of glaring off the top of a roof, it'll show light pretty much all the way across the roof, but there's one area that reflects the most light out. That top level highlight is going to be that area where it's reflecting the most light out, and then the mid-level highlight is going to be that area that covers the entire portion of that roof. And so I'm technically actually doing the mid-level highlight area here, but I'm using top level color. And this could be a common mistake for other people as well. So what I'll end up doing for my top level or my mid-level highlight color, what I'll end up doing is just going back over and making sure that I just shrink these colors down. So your learning experience. Yep. So I'm covering this entire front. This is where the mid-level highlight normally would be. This entire ridged up areas. I'll have to go back, like I said, and shorten this up a little bit, but it'll work. It won't be a problem. Mistakes happen a lot when you're painting, and what's interesting is finding unique ways of fixing them. So I'm just going to cover this gun here. It's important to watch what I'm doing here because there's going to be areas, part of this gun that's going to be brought out. His scoped area where you see the scope is going to be two areas there. One that's going to be further down and one that's further up, and you can see it there. That's where his magazine goes in. There's two areas there. It's the far left part of that magazine is raised up, and then that gun has these rivets through the top of it. So you actually want to get the rivets, but you don't want to get underneath of it because then you're covering up the black. So you want that contrast, and that's where you take this brush on the side like that and run it down those rivets. The gun is facing downwards, so you actually want to get the back end of the gun as well, whatever's showing by the sun, and then his elbows here too. So that's about it for the mid-level highlight. I'm still calling this the mid-level highlight even though I'm using top level color. But yeah, I do grab part of his sun visor here. But yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to top level highlight, and we'll show you kind of how I fixed the mid-level highlight mistake here. So give me just 1 second. Okay, so this is actually technically the top level highlight, but we're using the mid-level highlight color. This is a darker gray than what we're using for the top level. Typically what we try to do is for the mid-level highlight, you're using the contrast color between your top level highlight and your base color, but I accidentally used my top level color for my mid-level highlight, and so what I'm doing now is using my mid-level highlight color and using it as a top level, because what I'm going to be doing is basically going back over the mid-level highlights and shrinking down that top level color. So like on this gun here, I'm trying to make it where I covered most of that area. I'm going to go back over with my mid-level color and create that top level highlight. It may be confusing here to kind of explain it to you, but here hopefully I'm showing it to you a little bit better. So I'm only putting this color on the areas where I had my mid-level highlight, and instead of making a very small amount of paint on it, what I'm actually doing is taking that color that I had on my mid-level highlight and shrinking it down. So I'm going back over that Dawnstone, which was my very bright gray, and with my medium level gray here, and just making sure that that is actually just dimmed down a little bit here. Again, everything's very thin paints, and I may have to go over it multiple times to get the color I achieve, but I'm actually technically creating a top level highlight using a mid-light level color. And hopefully all that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, I'm sorry I made the mistake, but I think it was a good learning lesson on you don't have to scrap the miniature if you mess something up. So this is just a good way of going back over and making sure you do everything correctly. And it's in the same amount of steps. It's just backwards. If you think about it, you're just taking that color you used in that mid-level highlight and just dulled it down. If you're thinking about blending, this is a little bit like blending here. This is taking those very, very different distinctions in color. That Dawnstone's a very kind of almost a light gray versus the black on the base coating, and you're just dulling down the edges of that Dawnstone to make sure it flows a little bit better with the black. I'm trying to describe it in different ways so it makes sense to, hopefully one of those ways I described it makes sense to you. The under part of his hand here actually has a little bit of light showing to it, so I'm actually going to use this color and put that in there a little bit. So if you notice, I'm not going all the way down this rivet. I'm only going about halfway or 3/4 the way down, because that Dawnstone, that top level color, I want it shining on the very, very tip of this. So I'm just making this color here and shrinking down this Dawnstone, dumbing it down a little bit. Okay, so I think I've described this well enough. I'm going to come back here with our pure white, because not only is it going to be my top level highlight for my armor, but it actually will be the topmost brightest color for my gun as well. So we'll come back real here in just 1 second, and we'll deal with the white. Okay, so what's interesting enough is the top level highlight color is my white scar for the white armor, right, pieces of the armor, but it's also the topmost color I want for the gun as well. Because the gun is very reflective and it's supposed to be a metal material, I want the white at the white as like white tips for the edges of my highlights there too as well. So this is where I'm going to get this raised up area in this knee, the lifted up part of the armor. I'm going to get that with the white scar here, make sure that's very, very bright white, nice looking. I'm going to get all my raised up areas for that. So it's going to be, you just go through pretty much the miniature, find out where it's mostly hits white here, and I'm going to go ahead and touch that up. Okay, so this is very thin, so it's going to take me a little bit because I want to make sure I don't overdo it. But just make sure you go through the most raised up areas and really delve into that contrast. So I'm going to go through the armor here, and then I'll come right back with the gun. Okay, so I've coming back here with the gun, and what I want here is where the light hits the top of the metal parts, I want that really bright light. Even though it's a little fuzzy here, which I apologize about, you can already tell when I hit that gun with the white, you can see exactly where that light should be shining, and you can almost see the reflection even in the in the camera here. So those are the areas. It's not a big portion of this top level highlight. It's almost like a line or a dot, but it really does give a good effect on where it's going to reflect off. So the very tips of these little creases, very tips of the guns, pretty much everywhere where you put a mid-level or a top level highlight, you're going to want to almost what I call tipping them out with this white here. Now there's a lot of different ways of doing techniques for like a non-metal material. This is the way I do Star Wars Legion. I do different techniques for different miniatures, but for Star Wars Legion I typically do this kind of technique for it. So the guns are detailed, but they're not like, I don't know how to put it, they're not overly detailed. So something like this gives a really good effect to it, makes it look really professional. You could go as far as taking your top level highlight or your mid level highlight and lining the entire gun if you want to do that, but I tend to see this technique work really well, and I think it looks really good. So after this, what I actually am doing is I actually am doing a little bit of line detailing here. His crotch area, basically where I just did, I line that. I'm going to line his chest. Okay, so now we're moving on to our orange. I have two orange colors here, and I keep them all already on the palette for me because I'm going to have to end up blending this. And so because of that, I like to have it all ready for me. If I decide to do a wet blend, it's all right there. If I decide to load my brush, it's all there as well too. So I'm just pretty much lining this pad out next to my black areas where I want to make sure everything's lined straightly and it looks good. I'm going to cover it all with this darker orange, and that area that I had it a little too far out in the back here, I'm going to cover that up with orange as well. And because I do thin these out, these are going to be you're going to take probably 4 to 5 coats on the orange just by itself. I won't show all the coatings here, but this is a good step here just to cover this whole base with orange. Okay, now that I have the base color orange on, I'm going to start mixing my colors here. I'm going to take my base layer basically and my top level. I'm going to mix them together and kind of get a mid-level highlight here. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you can already tell, even judging by my thumb here, that the color is just enough detailed. I take it about a third of the way up on the front side and a third of the way up on the back, and go ahead and coating my top shoulder here with this mid-level color. So I'm a little out of camera here. I'm trying to keep it close to my face, but as you can see, you can already tell that there's a little bit lighter color on top. Next, we're going to be moving on to trying to blend the top level highlight with the rest of it. So give me just 1 second. We'll get into that. Okay, so I applied my mid-level that I liked, and now it's my top. And I even see through my thumb, and that's what I check, is that this top level is even lighter than the mid-level. And I want this, you can even see it right now where the light's hitting it. From my light source on top, you see where that glare is? Well, this glare is exactly where I'm placing this top level highlight. Now, what I find here is that it's too much of a distinction, so you can see the definitive line between each color. So after I apply this, I'm probably going to have to blend it through to make sure that you see more of a natural adjustment to each color here. But again, it's very thin, so I'm going to have to put coats on it. There is my base level color that I'm going to put right next to the mid-level highlight. Right in the back here. And while it's still wet, I'm going to take my mid-level highlight. Get a nice color here to it. Pop up a little excess. And I'm going to go ahead and blend it with my base coat right there on the back here. So that's a little bit of a style of wet blending there. Right, just enough here to make sure the lines aren't screwing up. I'm going to do this on the front as well. If you notice, I'm not going all the way down because I don't want to cover up that darkest color. So after I did my wet blending on the sides with the mid-level and the base coat, I'm doing the top level here. So I'm getting that line, that area that I want the top level to look like here. Again, it's very thin, so I want to make sure the color actually pops through. And just brushing my paint off real quick. And then that's the mid-level highlight. I apologize, my thumb's in the way, but I'm trying to get that mid-level highlight now on the edges to where I did the top level. So all in all, this is wet blending. So I'm just taking my 3 colors and I'm making sure that there's no distinct lines between the colors, and just making sure everything's blended well and it looks very natural and good. So after this, the miniature is done and we are now ready to move on to just the basing. So I'm going to base a little bit. I'm going to rim it with black and then we're good to go.